Why is the bald eagle the official national symbol of the United States?
In 1782, 6 years after the end of the Revolutionary War, leaders of the newly independent United States were designing a national seal, an image that would appear on official documents and elsewhere. Eventually these men settled on the bald eagle for the Great Seal of the United States. The bald eagle was chosen in part because it was believed to be found only in North America. The bald eagle was also admired for its strength, its noble appearance, and the freedom of its life spent soaring through the sky. While the eagle became an important American symbol when it was adopted for the U.S. seal in 1782, it wasn't until 1787 that it officially became the national emblem. The bald eagle has been used for the official seals of many states, and it has appeared on stamps, currency, or paper money, and several coins, including the quarter. The bald eagle's head is covered with white feathers.
What do the stars and stripes on the United States flag mean?
When the first United States flag was adopted in 1777, it had 13 alternating red and white stripes. 7 red, 6 white, and, in the upper left portion, 13 white stars on a blue background. The number 13 was chosen because that was the number of original states that formed the United States. For several years after that design was adopted, a new stripe and a new star were added each time a new state joined the Union. But in 1818 Congress decided to keep the number of stripes at 13 and simply add a new star for each new state. The U.S. flag has several nicknames: the Stars and Stripes, the Star-Spangled Banner, and Old Glory. At the time the U.S. flag was designed, the stars and stripes, and the colors of each, were given no specific meaning. The ideas for the design most likely were based on other countries' flags. In 1782, when the national seal was designed and the flag was incorporated into it, national leaders decided that each color and symbol should have a meaning. As reported in the book Our Flag, published by the U.S. House of Representatives in 1989, it was decided that red symbolized hardiness, strength, and valor, bravery. White symbolized purity and innocence, and blue represented vigilance, perseverance, and justice. It has also been said that the stars are symbols of the heavens, and the stripes represent rays of light coming from the sun.
So why is it called the bald eagle?
Because one meaning of the word bald that is not commonly used anymore refers to white markings. Due to excessive hunting, environmental pollution, and loss of habitat, the bald eagle population became dangerously low at one point, prompting the U.S. Congress to pass a law protecting it. Bald eagles were once listed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as an endangered species. meaning they were close to being extinct. Thanks to the laws protecting it, these birds have rebounded a bit. They are now listed as threatened, which means they are not as close to being extinct as they once were. But their numbers are still few, only about 50,000 in the United States, and it is illegal to hunt them.
Why was the Statue of Liberty built?
The Statue of Liberty, officially named Liberty Enlightening the World and sometimes referred to as Lady Liberty, was built in the late 1800s as a symbol of the friendship between France and the United States. France had supported American efforts to gain independence from England in the 1770s. And the United States had returned the favor during France's Revolution of the 1780s and 1790s. A joint effort between the two nations, the statue was designed and built in France. While the 154-foot, 47-meter, concrete pedestal was the responsibility of the Americans. Intended as a gift to celebrate the 100-year anniversary, or centennial, of American independence, which happened in 1776, the statue was designed by sculptor Frederick Augusta Bartholdi. He had help from many engineers and designers, including Alexander Gustave Eiffel, the man who designed the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France. Lack of funds in both countries slowed down the construction of the statue, and it wasn't actually completed until 1884, 8 years after the centennial. It took nearly a year for the statue, which was broken down and divided among more than 200 crates, to travel across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. And it was another whole year before the pedestal was completed. Finally, on October 28, 1886, the Statue of Liberty was officially dedicated in front of a crowd of thousands. Made of copper and steel, the statue, which depicts a woman who represents the concept of liberty, stands just over 151 feet, 46 meters, tall, plus the height of the pedestal. To give an idea of just how big the statue is, bear in mind these statistics: her index finger is 8 feet, 2.4 meters, long, her nose is 4.5 feet, 1.4 meters, long, and the width of her mouth is 3 feet, 0.9 meters. Lady Liberty holds a torch in one hand, symbolizing enlightenment or freedom from ignorance. The other hand holds a plaque that bears the date of American independence, July 4, 1776.
What is ozone?
Ozone is a sharp-smelling gas that is a form of oxygen. There is a layer of ozone in the upper atmosphere, about 15 miles, 25 kilometers, above Earth. That layer helps protect us from the harmful ultraviolet rays of the sun. Without the ozone layer, too many of those rays would get through, making it difficult for plants and animals to live. During the 1970s, scientists became aware that certain chemicals, called chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, were making the ozone layer thin and even causing some holes. CFCs were used in aerosol cans, air conditioners, and refrigerators. By the mid-1990s, the United States and many other countries had banned the use of CFCs. Ozone also exists in the lower atmosphere. But while the ozone in the upper atmosphere is beneficial, that in the lower atmosphere causes air pollution. When sunlight interacts with the fumes from cars and trucks, ozone is the main ingredient of the smog that is produced. In large amounts, ozone can cause headaches, itchy eyes, and lung problems in people. It can also harm other animals and plants. And it damages rubber tires and the outside surfaces of buildings.
Which dinosaurs were the smallest?
When most people think of dinosaurs, they picture the huge ones, like the giant plant-eating sauropods or the large carnivores, meat-eaters, like Tyrannosaurus rex. But some dinosaurs were actually very small. The smallest of them may have been the Compsognathus, pronounced Compsahgnathus, which was only about as big as a chicken.
Why is cloning so controversial?
The possibility of cloning human beings arouses curiosity and excitement in some people and deep suspicion and fear in others. Scientists and doctors have long intervened in the creation of new life, such as using various fertility treatments to help people have babies who otherwise couldn't. But these techniques require doctors to assist in the process that happens in nature, the merging of a sperm cell from a man's body with an egg from a woman's body. Cloning bypasses that process altogether, using one person's cells to create a new human being that will be identical to that person. That level of scientific involvement in the creation of human life makes many people uncomfortable. Supporters of cloning technology argue that there are numerous benefits to human cloning. Many scientists believe that cloning can lead to important breakthroughs for people with incurable diseases. This type of activity, called therapeutic cloning, has as its goal the creation of certain kinds of cells rather than the duplication of a complete person. In such experiments, a human embryo, the group of cells that, if implanted into a uterus, would grow into a baby, would be produced through cloning so that the embryo's stem cells, special cells that can develop into many different kinds of cells and tissue, can be extracted, destroying the embryo in the process. Stem cells can then be used to grow new tissue to replace a sick person's damaged organs or to cure diseases that otherwise would be fatal. Some scientists wish to pursue cloning technology to create babies for people who are unable to have children. and who wish to produce a child that shares their genetic makeup rather than adopting a baby. Many people have deeply felt concerns about cloning, particularly human cloning. They fear that this relatively new science is still too risky and unpredictable. Experiments with cloning a human might result in serious defects or health problems for the cloned subjects. Even Ian Wilmut, the scientist who led the team that produced the cloned sheep dolly, has strongly objected to experimenting with human cloning before further research is done. Many people object to cloning on religious grounds, arguing that life is sacred. And only God, not scientists and doctors, can create new life. Others worry that the ability to clone a person might be abused by some who would spend a great deal of money to create a genetically perfect child, selecting certain traits and discarding others. Many people are disturbed by the thought that some people might use cloning technology to replace a loved one who had died. Canadian.
How can scientists tell the age of fossils?
Scientists can learn many things about the conditions on the planet and ancient animal behavior from fossils. They can learn whether an area was once covered by lush forests, for example, or they can determine that some dinosaurs traveled in herds. They can also tell, in many cases, how long ago the fossilized plant or animal lived. One way to narrow down a fossil's age is by seeing what layer, or strata, of rock it appears in. The deepest layers contain the oldest fossils, while the top layers contain the most recent fossils. If they know the history of other fossils found nearby, specifically when these other animals lived, then they can determine the approximate age of newly found fossils. In some cases, scientists can pinpoint the age of a fossil by measuring something called a radioactive isotope. An isotope can be thought of as a version of a chemical element, like hydrogen or carbon, that has a slightly different atomic makeup than other versions of that element. For example, one isotope of hydrogen has one particle, a proton, in the nucleus. Another isotope has two particles, a proton and a neutron. Both are hydrogen, but they are different types of hydrogen. A radioactive isotope is one that is unstable and gives off some radiation. Over time, radioactive isotopes decay, forming a different chemical element altogether. For example, uranium eventually changes into lead. Scientists know how long it takes for various radioactive isotopes to decay. They discuss this time in terms of the isotope's half-life, or the amount of time it takes for half of the isotope to decay. If a radioactive isotope has a 1,000-year half-life, then half of it will have decayed in 1,000 years and all of it will have decayed, or turned into another element, in 2,000 years. So let's say a scientist measures the amount of a radioactive isotope in a chunk of rock. Knowing that this element will have completely transformed into another element after 2,000 years. if the scientist finds very little of the isotope and a great deal of the element it turns into. Then he or she knows that the rock and the fossil found in it is almost 2,000 years old.
What is smog?
Smog, which originally was named by combining the words smoke and fog, is a type of air pollution. Smog was so named because it can form when moisture in the air combines with smoke particles. The smoke particles come from factories burning coal. This kind of smog has been a problem in London and other cities in Great Britain. Another kind of smog, called photochemical smog, is generally what people mean when they refer to this kind of pollution. Photochemical smog occurs when sunlight combines with the fumes from cars and factories in big cities. This combination produces a chemical reaction, resulting in gases called oxidants. When the weather conditions are right, very little wind, or a layer of warm air settling on top of a layer of cool air, smog can accumulate and hover in the air. The Los Angeles, California, area is especially famous for its high levels of smog. The conditions are ripe for a smog problem in Los Angeles. There are a lot of cars producing a great deal of exhaust. The city is located in a valley, where smog tends to accumulate. And it is surrounded by mountains, which means little wind gets in to break up the smog. The oxidants produced in photochemical smog pollute the air, damage plant life, and, in extreme cases, causes people to get sick. It has even been responsible for deaths. Over a 4-day period in 1952, the smog in London became so heavy and thick that people could barely see what was in front of them. By the end of that period, 4,000 people had died from lung ailments produced by the toxic chemicals. In the United States, in the town of Donora, Pennsylvania, 20 people died and thousands more became sick when smog levels reached a dangerous high. Laws attempting to reduce levels of air pollution have made some improvements, but the huge number of cars, factories, and power plants in industrialized nations like the United States continue to produce high levels of air pollution.
Why do we have different time zones throughout the world?
At one time, every region of the world had its own system for measuring time. Traveling from one locality to another could be very confusing. Adding to the confusion is the fact that, even if every place measured time in the same way, with each day being 24 hours, each hour being 60 minutes, etc., the fact that Earth is constantly rotating means that when it's midday in Chicago, Illinois, it's early evening in London, England. The rotation of the planet means that we can't have just one time zone for the whole world. If that were the case, then noon would be the middle of the day in some places, the evening in other places, and the middle of the night somewhere else. In some places, the sun would go down at 7 p.m. But that same hour thousands of miles to the east would be the time the sun was rising. In the late 1800s, participants at an international conference figured out a way to divide the world into different time zones to account for Earth's movements. In one day, Earth makes one rotation on its axis. It moves 15 degrees every hour, so after 24 hours it has come full circle, or 360 degrees. Scientists therefore decided to divide the planet into 24 sections of 15 degrees each. They used the imaginary longitudinal lines, called meridians, that run between the North and South poles. The starting point is a place called Greenwich, a London suburb. The line running through Greenwich is called the prime meridian. Every 15 degrees to the west of Greenwich is another hour earlier than what is known as Greenwich Mean Time, or GMT, and every 15 degrees to the east is another hour later. So if it is noon in Greenwich, in one time zone to the west it is 11 a.m. And in one time zone to the east it is 1 p.m. While the longitudinal lines are straight and fixed. The lines dividing actual time zones have been changed a bit to accommodate the people who live there.
What are the greenhouse effect and global warming?
A greenhouse is a glass structure built for plants. The glass walls and ceiling allow the light from the sun to enter but prevent the sun's heat from leaving, providing the kind of warm climate greenhouse plants need. Certain gases in the atmosphere act in much the same way as the glass panels of the greenhouse, letting sunlight shine through to the ground and trapping the heat produced by that light. The greenhouse effect happens naturally, without human interference. But by introducing large amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, human beings have turned a natural occurrence into a potential problem. With the industrialization of the 1800s and 1900s, the amount of greenhouse gases increased tremendously. Some greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide, are produced by burning such fuels as coal, natural gas, and oil. The amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has increased by about 25% in the last 200 years. Plants absorb some carbon dioxide, but much of it rises to the atmosphere, contributing to the greenhouse effect. Other gases that contribute to the greenhouse effect are ozone and methane. If too much heat is trapped in the atmosphere, it may eventually make Earth's climate warmer. This effect, known as global warming, may seem harmless enough. And if you live in a place with harsh winters, it might even seem like a good thing. But the delicate balance of life on Earth can be severely disrupted by a change in the planet's climate. If the temperature of Earth's surface increased enough, it could melt the polar ice caps. The massive, thick ice formations at the North and South poles, raising the level of the oceans and possibly flooding coastal areas. Climate changes can also affect weather patterns, changing rainfall and snowfall. amounts and making storms more severe and the lives of plants and animals.
What is a fossil?
A fossil is the hardened remains or an imprint of a plant or animal that lived a very long time ago. Some fossils are thousands of years old, others are several 100 million years old. Most plants and animals died and then decayed without ever leaving a trace. But some were buried under mud, rocks, ice, or other heavy coverings before decaying. The pressure of these layers over thousands of years turned animal and plant remains into rock. Usually fossils preserve the organism's hard parts, the bones or shells of an animal and the seeds, stems, and leaf veins of plants. Sometimes the fossil is the actual animal part, like a bone or tooth, that has hardened into rock. Some fossils, called trace fossils, show the imprint of parts of the animal or plant. Occasionally these imprints act as a mold, and the sediment that fills the imprint hardens and becomes a cast of, for example, a dinosaur footprint. Sometimes bones or trees are preserved by minerals that seep into the part's pores and then harden, or petrify, that part. Arizona's petrified forest contains numerous examples of giant trees that were petrified millions of years ago. In some cases, an entire animal is preserved in ice. Hardened tree sap, called amber, or in dry, desert areas. In these instances, as with woolly mammoths found in Alaska and elsewhere, the whole animal hair, skin, bones, internal organs is preserved much as it was when it died thousands of years earlier.
How did the days of the week get their names?
In the English language, some of the days of the week take their names from the celestial bodies that, according to ancient beliefs, ruled that day. So the day ruled by the sun became Sunday, the day ruled by the moon became Monday, and the day ruled by the planet Saturn became Saturday. The remaining days of the week take their names from figures in Anglo-Saxon or Norse mythology. Tuesday is named for the Anglo-Saxon god of war, Tiu, which is Mars in Roman mythology. Wednesday is named for Woden, the Anglo-Saxon name for the chief Norse god Odin. Thursday gets its name from Thor, the god of thunder in Norse mythology. Friday is named either after Freya, the Norse goddess of love and fertility, or Frigg, the wife of Odin and the representative of beauty and love.
Why do some people lose the hair on their heads?
Scientists have been trying to figure out why some people, mostly men, begin to lose their hair as they grow older. It is believed that a certain hormone, Hormones are chemicals that are produced by glands and control different body processes. Causes hair follicles to shrink, and they begin to produce shorter, thinner hairs. The tendency to lose hair or be bald runs in families, meaning that it is an inherited trait. In rare cases, diseases can also cause people to lose their hair. Sometimes hair loss happens as a result of chemotherapy treatments for cancer and anti-cancer. Drugs affect some healthy cells as well, including those that cause hair growth. Hair loss due to chemotherapy is reversible. However, hair will usually begin growing back once the treatments are over.
Why, then, are the buttons on women's clothing arranged in an opposite way? For fastening from right to left?
Although no one knows for sure, it is believed that the tradition for arranging women's buttons began long ago, when buttons were considered very fine ornaments, made of silver, gold, and jewels. Women who could afford many fine clothes with beautiful buttons usually had maids who dressed them. It was easier for maids, who were usually right-handed, to help with their mistress's clothing if the buttons that faced them were fastened from left to right. Of course, today, nearly all women dress themselves. And it would make sense if all clothes buttoned with the ease of the right-hander in mind. But the tradition of button arrangement is so old and women are so used to fastening them a certain way that the situation is unlikely to change.
Why do butterflies and other insects fly from flower to flower?
Butterflies and other insects fly from one plant to the next to feed on the sweet nectar and sometimes the pollen located in the interior of flowers. The sugar in nectar supplies insects with the energy they need. And pollen contains protein, fat, vitamins, and minerals. In the process of feeding, many insects transfer pollen which sticks to their bodies from one plant's flower to another. Pollen, which is a fine powdery grain from a flower's male reproductive organ, must be transferred to the female reproductive organ of a flower for fertilization to take place and seeds to form.
Why do we have daylight saving time?
Daylight saving time, DST, came about as a way to adjust clocks during the summer months, when days are longer, to make better use of the daylight hours. Countries began making such clock adjustments during World War I. 1914 to 1918, to save on the fuel needed for artificial light. If people could adjust their clocks so that it got dark at 9 p.m. instead of 8 p.m., then they could turn their lights on 1 hour later, or not at all if they simply went to bed when it got dark. These energy savings have continued today since it gets dark later in the evening. People don't turn on lights until later in the day. And in the summer, the sun rises very early and is usually up when people awake, reducing the need to turn on lights first thing in the morning. In the fall, as the days begin to get shorter, we go back to standard time, which means that the sun sets and rises at an earlier time of day. As the days get shorter, the amount of time between sunrise and sunset shrinks, so that in the heart of winter daylight arrives later in the day and departs earlier than in the spring and summer months. In the United States, daylight saving time, as decided by Congress, begins at 2 a.m. on the first Sunday in April and ends at 2 a.m. on the last Sunday in October, when DST begins. People move their clocks forward 1 hour. When it ends in October, clocks are moved back 1 hour. If you have trouble remembering which direction the clocks should go at which time of year, just think of the expression spring forward, fall back. Many other countries in the world observe some form of daylight saving time, though the exact starting and ending dates differ.
How are moths different from butterflies?
While moths and butterflies are very similar and belong to the same order of insects, Lepidoptera, there are noticeable differences between them. Butterflies are generally active during the day, and moths are usually nocturnal, or active at night. Butterflies have knobs on the ends of their antennae, while moths do not. Butterflies tend to be more colorful than moths. And moths and butterflies hold their wings differently when at rest. Moths lay theirs out flat, like an airplane, while butterflies hold theirs vertically above their bodies.
What is an allowance?
An allowance is an amount of money usually given each week to a child by his or her parents. Kids can use this money to pay for their personal expenses, for things like special snacks, toys, or activities with their friends. In some families, parents do not give their kids allowances, and children just ask their parents when money is needed. But allowances are useful, because they help teach kids how to manage money. Children learn how to control their expenses by staying within their weekly budgets. And children can learn to save if they want to buy something expensive by holding on to a portion of their allowances each week. Generally, as children grow older, they become better at handling money. They also have more expenses. So older children usually require larger allowances. In some families, allowances are considered payment for doing household chores, and they increase when children grow older and do more work around the house.
What are invertebrates?
It may seem that most of the world's animals are vertebrates, what's left after mammals. birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. In fact, invertebrates make up more than 90% of the world's living animals. Any animal that lacks a backbone is an invertebrate. They do not have a bony skeleton, but many do possess a hard, shell-like exterior. Invertebrates include insects, worms, crustaceans, like crabs and lobsters, mollusks, clams and oysters, and arachnids, spiders, scorpions, and ticks.
How do birds know when it's time to migrate?
Scientists believe that in some species, young migrating birds learn when and how to migrate from the older birds in the flock. Experts have also noted that changes in the temperature and amount of daylight seem to trigger a migrating impulse in birds. As the days get shorter and the amount of sunlight decreases in the autumn, migrating birds begin to produce hormones. These hormones cause the birds to store up more fat in their bodies. Fat that can be converted into energy to help sustain them on their long flights. As the time for migrating approaches, birds display signs of restlessness. Some people have even observed such restlessness among captive birds, which have a steady food supply and little contact with outside temperatures and sunlight.
What is a salamander?
A salamander is an amphibian that usually has 4 legs and a tail that is almost as long as its body. There are hundreds of different types of salamanders, including newts, mud puppies, and hellbenders. Like other amphibians, salamanders hatch from eggs laid in water or moist areas. They then go through a larval, youth, stage as aquatic creatures with gills, eventually metamorphosing, or changing, into air-breathing adults that live on land. Some salamander species, like the mud puppy, keep their gills in adulthood. Some types of newts, after graduating from aquatic larvae to land-dwelling adults, at which point they are called efts, will spend a couple years on land only to return to water permanently. They continue to breathe through lungs, and through their skin. But they spend the rest of their days living in the water.
Why do I have to be a good sport when I lose a game?
Games or competitions always have winners and losers. When you agree to play a game, you have to prepare yourself for the fact that you may not win. Accepting a loss is hard, because winning a game gives you a wonderful feeling of being the best.
Do any lizards live in water?
Lizards need to breathe air, so there are no living species that live in water all of the time. Several species of lizards can and do swim, spending part of their lives in the water looking for various freshwater organisms to eat. Only one species, the marine iguana of the Galapagos Islands, is known to get its food from salty seawater. It eats seaweed and algae, and some marine iguanas have been known to dive underwater in search of food for periods of up to half an hour. As they eat, marine iguanas naturally swallow lots of salt water, but they are able to remove the salt from their bodies because they, like all iguanas, have salt glands between their eyes and nostrils. These glands concentrate and remove the salt, depositing it in the iguana's nostril. The lizard then gets rid of the salt by sneezing. The resulting bit of salt that shoots out of the iguana's nostril is used to scare off potential enemies.
What is the order of the planets in our solar system?
Starting with that closest to the Sun, the order of the planets is Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. If you have trouble keeping track of this order, remember this sentence, in which the first letter of each word is also the first letter of a planet. My very educated mother just served us 9 pizzas.
Can flowers be eaten?
Believe it not, people have been eating flowers for centuries. The broccoli and cauliflower that we eat are actually clusters of flowers. Artichokes are also flower heads. Even some blossoms that look more like regular flowers, pansies and roses, for instance, have a long edible history. Flowers can taste sweet, minty, or bitter. They give a special flavor or even a pretty look to many foods. But it is very important to know which flowers, or parts of flowers, can be eaten, because lots of plants are poisonous. Even if you know it isn't poisonous, it's better not to eat blooms that you find growing outside, because you don't know if they've been treated with chemicals, pesticides, to control insects. Safe, edible flowers can be found in food stores. Or you can grow your own from seeds that come in specially labeled packets that tell you the flowers will be okay to eat.
What are eyebrows and eyelashes for?
Eyebrows and eyelashes protect the eyes, which are fairly delicate. Protecting the eyes is important because people rely far more on sight to get information about their world than on any of their other senses. We don't have the keen sense of smell that a dog has, for instance, or the excellent hearing of a cat. Eyebrows keep sweat and dust and dirt from reaching our eyes. Eyelashes do the same, protecting the delicate surface of the eyeball.
Why do helium-filled balloons float up in the air?
While it may seem strange, the gases that make up air have weight. A cubic yard of air at sea level, which serves as the starting point from which all measurements of elevation, ocean depth, and atmosphere begin, weighs more than 2 pounds. When a balloon is filled with a gas like helium, which weighs less than air, it floats.
Why do people wear uniforms?
Some jobs require special clothing or uniforms. Sometimes these special clothes are meant to protect workers or the people they work with. An emergency room doctor, for instance, may wear special clothes to protect herself from blood and infectious agents as well as to protect patients from the germs and impurities that may be present on ordinary clothing. Most often, though, special clothes or uniforms are worn so that workers can be easily recognized by other people. Occupations that require uniforms are frequently service jobs, where workers help or perform services for other people. Workers in stores and restaurants frequently wear uniforms so that customers know who to ask for help or service. Uniforms help police officers do their jobs better, because people recognize them and go to them for help or give them the cooperation they need to maintain the law. On the battlefield, soldiers wear uniforms to identify which country they are from, signaling whether they are friends or enemies.
What is a skyscraper?
A skyscraper is a building of great height that has an iron or steel frame inside that supports its floors and walls. Before builders figured out how to make such frames, stone or brick walls had to bear the weight of structures, which could not stand up if they were made too high. And tall stone or brick buildings had to have very thick walls on lower floors to bear the weight of the walls and floors above them. These thick walls wasted a lot of useful space. Because cities have limited land, builders experimented with materials and construction methods in an effort to construct taller buildings that were more practical. Finally, in 1885, William L. E. Baron Jenney built the first modern skyscraper, in Chicago, Illinois. While just 10 stories high, which seems short by today's standards. The home insurance company building was the first structure to have an internal steel skeleton bear all of its weight. From that point on, tall buildings began to soar into the air, scraping the sky. Just 30 years after the first skyscraper was built, buildings were erected that reached 60 stories high. Today, the Sears Tower in Chicago has the most stories of any skyscraper at 110. Of course, None of these great heights would have been practical if the electric elevator had not been invented. Skyscrapers, though, presented a unique set of problems. The buildings had to have a certain amount of flexibility so that strong winds and bad weather would not damage them. The Sears Tower is always swaying, averaging about 6 inches from its true center. Too many skyscrapers built close together also blocked out light and reduced airflow to the buildings and the streets below, creating unhealthy conditions. And fires were a special concern in skyscrapers because a small blaze on lower floors could quickly be sucked up elevator shafts and stairways, creating a deadly inferno. So builders learned to use fire-resistant construction materials, as well as safety features like smoke detectors, water sprinklers, metal fire doors, and fire escapes.
What is the world's highest waterfall?
It isn't easy to measure the height of waterfalls because they usually descend in a series of falls instead of in one big drop. The world's highest waterfall, Angel Falls, named after the man who discovered it, is located in Venezuela, on the Carao River. It has the largest single drop of any waterfall at 2,648 feet, 807 meters. The total height of Angel Falls is 3,212 feet, 979 meters. You can see North America's highest waterfall, Yosemite Falls, 2,425 feet, or 739 meters, when you visit Yosemite National Park in California.
Where do insects go in the winter?
Most insects survive the winter in an inactive state known as diapause. It is a type of hibernation in which all body processes slow down and little energy is required for survival. A few types of insects, like the monarch butterfly of North America, migrate to a warmer place just like many birds to spend the winter, returning in the spring.
If a plant isn't green, can it still perform photosynthesis?
Many plants contain other pigments in addition to the green pigment chlorophyll, which traps light energy for photosynthesis. These other pigments can mask chlorophyll's green color. So the leaves and stems of such plants may appear red, purple, or even brown. But these plants still contain chlorophyll and can still use photosynthesis to produce food.
Why are zebras striped?
Zebras are black and white, or brown and white, striped members of the horse family that live and graze in the grassy open plains and brush country of Africa. They usually live in large herds of several hundred. Although they are fast runners, up to 40 miles, or 60 kilometers per hour, they are often overtaken by lions and leopards, their main predators. It would seem that such bold stripes and stark colors would make the zebra an easy target for its predators. But scientists believe that their stripes help zebras blend in with each other, making it difficult for a predator to single out one zebra to attack. Some have suggested that zebra's stripes resemble patterns of light and shadow in brush and grass, fooling the animal's predators from a distance.
How deep are the oceans?
The ocean floors have shelves, slopes, cliffs, mountains, valleys, and canyons, just like the surface of Earth. So the depth of each ocean varies greatly when measured in different places. The average depth of all the oceans is around 13,124 feet, 4,000 meters. Though the Arctic Ocean is by far the shallowest, along the underwater edges of the continents. In what is called the continental margins, are deep, narrow canyons known as trenches. In these trenches are the ocean's greatest depths. The Pacific Ocean's Mariana Trench extends down 36,198 feet, 11,034 meters, the Atlantic's Puerto Rico Trench reaches 28,374 feet, 8,648 meters, below sea level. The Indian Ocean's Java Trench descends for 25,344 feet, 7,725 meters, and the Arctic's Eurasia Basin reaches 17,881 feet, 5,450 meters, in depth. People can descend to the deepest parts of the oceans only in special vehicles. The deep sea is cold and sunless, and the pressure from the water above is almost crushing. But from ships on the surface, scientists can use sonar, or sound waves, to determine the depth of the seas and the shape of ocean floors. An instrument called an echo sounder sends out sound signals, which travel through water at nearly 1 mile per second. The signals are reflected back to the ship in echoes that show how far away the ocean floor is. The longer the echoes take to reach the ship, the deeper the water.
What are spores?
Complex types of plants. Conifers and flowering plants reproduce by way of seeds. These seeds began as tiny spores. The spores in the female reproductive parts of the plant produce an egg cell, while the spores in the male reproductive parts produce sperm cells enclosed in a pollen grain. When the pollen grain is carried, by wind or insects, for example, to a plant's female parts, one of the sperm cells joins with the egg cell, and a seed is formed. That seed contains everything necessary, with the help of water, the right soil, and sunlight, to make a new plant, and once seeds are scattered, they can germinate, or grow into a plant. Simpler types of plants like mosses and ferns reproduce by scattering spores rather than seeds. These plants produce spores in sporangia, or spore cases. Once the spores are mature, they are released and scatter. Sometimes carried by wind and water until they reach suitable places for new plants to start. Once spores germinate, they produce tiny plants called gametophytes, which look nothing like the parent plants they came from. Gametophytes produce sex cells and then unite with each other to create the next generation. Plants called sporophytes, which do resemble their parents. During the sporophyte stage, the plant produces spores, which eventually fall to the ground, scatter, and begin the process all over again. Spores are in the air all around us, though they are so small that we can only see them with a microscope. But we know they are there because some of them grow into the molds and mildews that show up around the bathtub or on certain foods that are left on the counter for too long.
What causes a burp?
When you get food and drink into your airway, problems occur. But when too much air enters your digestive system, it's not a big deal. It just comes back up in the form of a burp. Sometimes a person takes in gulps of air when he or she eats or drinks too fast. Gum chewing can also lead to swallowed air. At other times, the food or drink like soda pop, for example, is responsible for the burp. Filled with carbon dioxide gas to make it bubbly, soda releases air once it's in your stomach.
What do B, C and AD mean?
B. C stands for before Christ, while AD is short for the Latin phrase Anno Domini, which means in the year of the Lord. Some mistakenly believe those letters to stand for after death. These designations, established around AD 523 by a monk named Dionysius Exiguus, mark the year of Jesus Christ's birth as the beginning of the Christian era. Everything that happened before Jesus Christ was born is labeled as BC. And everything after is considered to be part of the Christian era and is labeled as AD. The years before the birth of Christ count down, or are counted backwards, to his birth, ending in 1 BC. The Christian era begins. With the year AD 1, there was no year 0. Fairly soon after Dionysius's system was put in place, discoveries were made that showed he had miscalculated the year of Jesus Christ's birth. But in spite of his error, his system remains the standard in use around the world. This system of counting years is based on the Christian religion. And yet it is used even in countries that have citizens of other religions. Many people prefer that non-religious terms should be used, with the abbreviations BCE, or before Common Era, replacing BC and CE or Common Era. Replacing AD. But the usage of BC and AD are still far more common than any alternatives.
How can their knees bend that way?
The answer is, they don't. What appear to be flamingos' knees are actually their ankles. Their knees are up closer to their bodies, hidden by feathers. And they are actually standing on their toes.
Why are the oceans blue?
Like the blue appearance of the sky, oceans and other bodies of water only appear blue. As you know, if you've ever scooped some of that water into a clear container and seen that it isn't actually blue. Scientists believe some bodies of water appear to be blue because of the same principle that makes the sky look blue. When sunlight, which is white light consisting of many wavelengths that each correspond to a different color, hits seawater, some of its wavelengths are absorbed. Others, especially the wavelengths that give us the color blue, are scattered after colliding with water molecules and reflected back to us. So if water is clear, without too much dirt, algae, or other material floating in it, and at least 10 feet deep, it will appear blue to us. Water that has a lot of dirt or other floating particles can appear brown, green, or gray.
Why does this happen, and more important, how can you make it go away so you can keep eating?
Everything you eat passes over the roof of your mouth, also called the palate. When something very cold touches the back of the palate, it affects a nerve center there that controls how much blood flows to your head. Depending on the circumstances, the nerve impulses can constrict or narrow blood vessels, or it can dilate or widen them. Scientists have not devoted much time to studying the cause of ice cream headaches, mostly because they pass quickly and are not serious. But doctors believe that the cold sensation on your palate may send a signal to the nerves there that your head needs warming up. Blood vessels open, allowing more blood, and more warmth, to flow through. This rapid dilation causes a buildup of fluid in your tissues that can't immediately drain. The extra fluid causes slight swelling, which results in the shooting pain you feel in the front of your head. Ice cream headaches rarely last more than a minute. But the pain can be intense enough to make you want to avoid them altogether. Try eating your ice cream or drinking your milkshake more slowly, and try not to let the cold stuff linger. On the roof of your mouth, hold the food more in the front or on the sides of your mouth before swallowing. Also, you can warm up your palate by placing your tongue there for a few seconds.
Is an elephant's trunk really its nose?
Yes, an elephant breathes through its trunk, or proboscis, which has two nostrils through which air can pass. But an elephant's muscular trunk, which nearly reaches the ground, can do several other remarkable things. On the end of the trunk is a sensitive, finger-like lip or protuberance. An African elephant has two, that can feel and pick up food and other objects. The end of an elephant's trunk is so sensitive that it can pick up a piece of thread from the floor. An elephant can also pick up and carry large things like logs by wrapping. Its strong trunk, which contains hundreds of individual muscles around them. Because elephants are intelligent and easily trained, people have used them for centuries to do heavy work in certain parts of the world. An elephant can draw water up into its trunk and either release it into its mouth for a drink or shower it onto its back. It can do the same with dust and dirt, giving itself a soothing spray. An elephant also uses its trunk to make noise. The trumpeting sound we associate with elephants comes from its trunk.
How fast can birds fly?
There is great variation in flight speeds among the nearly 8,000 species of birds. Small songbirds like wrens and sparrows fly 10 to 20 miles, 16 to 32 kilometers per hour. While ducks, geese, and pigeons can fly at speeds up to 60 miles, 97 kilometers per hour. Some birds, like the peregrine falcon and golden eagle, have been time diving at speeds exceeding 170 miles, 274 kilometers per hour. Scientists have had a hard time measuring how fast a bird can fly, due in part to the variable effects of wind. A strong wind at a bird's back can help it fly much faster, while flying directly into a wind can slow the bird down considerably.
What is a volcano?
A volcano is a natural opening in Earth's crust through which hot molten, or melted, rock, known as lava, as well as gases, steam, and ash. What remains after solid material is completely burned, escapes, often in a big, noisy eruption or explosion. These eruptions are thought to act like safety valves, relieving the enormous heat and pressure that exist deep in Earth's interior. A volcano is usually a cone-shaped mountain, its sides built up from solidified lava and ash, that has a hole or crater in its center through which it vents. There are several different kinds or stages of eruptions, many causing no damage to the places or people located near the volcano. But a few eruptions are huge and destructive. During these, lava can pour out and run down the volcano into surrounding areas, and enormous suffocating clouds of steam, ash, hot gases, and shooting rock can travel downhill at great speeds, covering many miles. When Washington's Mount St. Helens exploded in 1980, for instance, such volcanic clouds killed millions of trees. One of the most famous and destructive volcanic eruptions occurred in AD 79, when Mount Vesuvius in what is now Italy erupted, destroying the important Roman city of Pompeii. The Great Cloud of cinder and ash that covered the city preserved it remarkably. And much has been learned about ancient Roman times by studying these amazing ruins. Mt. Vesuvius is still an active volcano, which means that volcanic activity still occurs there and eruptions happen from time to time. A volcano may also be described as dormant, which means that no activity has occurred for a long while, but conditions still exist for an eruption to take place in the future. An extinct volcano is one that will never erupt again. Many volcanoes occur near the area where two ridges or plates of Earth's crust meet. Circling the Pacific Ocean where crust plates meet is a group of volcanoes known as the Ring of Fire. Plate movement in such regions may allow liquid rock, called magma, that is located in chambers in Earth's interior to rise, resulting in volcanic activity. Such conditions often result in earthquakes as well. Volcanic activity can take place under the ocean as well as on land. And when this happens, the formation of islands sometimes results. The Hawaiian Islands were created by just such volcanic activity some 40 million years ago. Even today, two of the world's most active volcanoes, Mauna Loa and Kilauea, are located on the island of Hawaii. Visitors to Hawaii's volcanoes National Park can travel to the slopes that surround the great volcanoes.